We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no fluff email that boils down our three biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Dave Elkington. He's the CEO and founder of InsideSales.com. Dave, how are you doing today, sir?
Fantastic, and thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, thank you for joining us. I love what you guys are doing over there, Dave. For folks who aren't familiar with you, I would love for you to share a little bit about your background and what you and the team at InsideSales.com are up to these days.
Yeah, no, that's great. Appreciate the time to give a little bit of context to what I think might be an interesting topic today. So my background it's a little bit eclectic. My undergraduate degree was in philosophy, but then I went back to get a master's in computer science. There's actually a bridge between those two. I was really fascinated. I know that same laughter you just shared was the laughter my parents shared when I told them I was gonna go into philosophy, right? So I got super interested in understanding the way people think and categorize information when I was, studying philosophy, and really got interested in like Aristotelian classification and set theory and things like that. Then I left, went into venture and banking, and then went back to get a master's in computer science to see if I could algorithmically represent some of these philosophical concepts. And ultimately, I started InsideSales.com as my master. I frankly the fruition of my master's thesis, and
Wow.
there was an epiphany that hit me. And it's interesting when I was getting the degree, which I guess in disclosure, I didn't get the degree. I started this and it kind of took off, and so I'm like probably many entrepreneurs a little unfulfilled there. But the epiphany was, it's not about the AI. Like AI is a bit of a hype. AI is not about the math. It's more about the data. And I was naively thinking I was going to go, uncover the Higgs boson, if you will, of machine learning algorithms.
Okay.
But what I found was most of the math, I guess the basic math that we still use today for machine learning, which is the mathematical or the programmatic way of describing AI, has been around for 60 and 70 years. So an example is back in 1958 or 9, Arthur Samuel from IBM, who's arguably the father of machine learning, was using decision trees and expert systems to automate checkers games, to create like an AI-based checkers games. Just a year later, it's like 1960, I think, Stanford Labs is using neural nets to filter jitter and echo out of phone conversations. So the question is, what's new? And it's today, the reason why AI has had a renaissance is because there is the ability to store and analyze massive amounts of data. So InsideSales.com, you asked the question, what's inside sales and, what are we doing? We're a sales acceleration platforms. We have cadence tools and things like that, but it's all based off of a learning platform, a data collection platform that allows us to kind of learn from the collective. We call it collective intelligence, and it's the same thing that you see in Netflix or with Google Waze, that you're basically learning not just off of your behavior, but you're learning off of the behavior of everybody. That's what kind of the framework that I think leads to the conversation today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. That definitely sets us up because we're going to be talking about some data that you guys have collected and a recent research project that you guys underwent that produced this state of sales development report. I've heard Gabe on your team talking about this on LinkedIn, sharing a few stats and those sorts of things. And we're going to get into some of the surprises of the information that came out of that. But I think what's important to set the stage is we've talked a little bit about data. You guys have a platform that empowers sales teams. Specifically, you are looking at the state of sales development and prospecting. So tell us a little bit about why you felt this topic was important to dedicate some resources to, some time to really uncover what the data might be showing.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question because we're not a research company at all. In fact, any of the research we publish is purely because it serves an internal purpose of we're trying to understand what's happening in the market, how to build products that service our customers better. So there was really no other purpose except to understand really what's happening in the market. And the way our technology works is it observes patterns across, tens of thousands of sellers, and then it can say, hey, this is actually the best way to engage in a sales conversation, or this is the best way to do whatever. And so the question we asked was, there's a lot of surveys in the market today. People are discussing best practices around cadence. Should you call? Should you email? What order should you be doing these sort of activities in? How often should you be engaging with people? Just all of those kind of fundamental questions. Now, we were curious if there was a gap between what we believe we're doing and what we're in fact really doing. And the reason we were thinking about this was we were sitting around talking about the anomaly of the beginning of year recommitment to go to the gym. And at the beginning of the year, as we all know, we renew our resolutions for the year, and we say, look, I'm going to go to the gym, every day. And then reality is we probably maybe go once or twice a week. And then by the end of the year, we're probably going once or twice a month. But if you ask us, of course, we're going every day. And so this gap between those two intrigued us. And we thought, man, there's got to be a similar gap between what we believe we're doing in sales, what we're in fact doing in sales. And then the last question we wanted to ask is, well, what should we be doing? Is going every day to the gym the best thing? Is it only maybe 2 or 3 days a week? And so that was what we were trying to answer.
Yeah, I love the way that you broke that down into the 3 categories, whether you're looking at prospecting and sales development or going to the gym or anything else that you're trying to better understand. There are those 3 elements, right? What we're actually doing, what we believe we're doing, or at least we say we're doing, which, salespeople may tend to sell, what they're actually doing a little bit, put some spin on there, right? And then where is optimal? Where are people actually seeing the results in their prospecting or at the gym? So as we get into this a little bit more, Dave, can you tell us a little bit about the methodology that you guys took? Where some of the data sources, those sorts of things, to put some context to the findings?
Yeah, actually the right question. And the market is a little bit flooded with just pure survey sort of studies. And really all a survey is going to do is it's going to give you the perception is what we believe we're doing.
Right.
So we started there and we did over the course of a few different surveys, we had over 1,500 companies respond to the survey. And that's what gave us the baseline of what people believe they're doing. And then the next thing we did is we said, in our data, we call our data platform neurolytics. It's a machine learning platform or an AI platform that learns and observes actual behavior. And then the last thing we did is we put it within the context of deals actually won. So, at our company, we have several thousand customers or companies that use the technology. So we just said, okay, what behavior leads to a successful purchase or a successful outcome? So it's really 3 elements: the survey, the behavioral data, and then the outcome data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it sounds like we've got all the components to find those 3 elements that we were talking about, from a strategic perspective. One of the things I wanted to touch on as we get into some of the findings was that you guys have a nice infographic that breaks this out into the different elements of sales development and prospecting that you looked at: attempts, media, duration, spacing, response, and content. Can you tell us a little bit about, why that approach or where that breakup of the prospecting process kind of came from?
Yeah, so there's 6 elements that we found. In fact, the way this sort of study happens is we have, a hypothesis, just like, in 6th grade science, and we then hand it over to a bunch of data scientists, and they start looking at what are called control variables. And these are the things that we say, if we leave this the same and analyze everything else, how does it look? And they actually came
Right.
back and they said, boy, and remember, these guys don't have it. They really don't know that much about sales. They don't have that much background. All they say is, look, I'm looking at the data, and there's 6 control variables. There's 6 things that seem to affect success and failure in the way people, and particularly an SDR, engages in that initial conversation. So if you're prospecting and you're trying to drum up some new business, from the data scientist perspective, there are 3 things that you should be thinking about. And some of these are kind of obvious, right? Like the number of attempts. And we all know that that's a thing that matters. The content, like we know that's a thing that matters. So one of the ones that really surprised me was the spacing. Spacing is not typically something I think we intuitively think about in terms of how do we organize ourselves in how we're engaging with our customers or our prospects. Now, the spacing is the space between each of our attempts. And there was shockingly a pretty high correlation between how effectively we communicate with our customers or our prospects, and how the likelihood that they'll respond based off of, do we wait 1 day, do we wait 1 hour, do we wait
Mhm.
6 days?
Right.
That spacing is an example of one that kind of shocked us. But that's how this kind of came about. Was we handed this data to the data scientists, and we just said, come back and tell us what seems to matter, like what affects success or failure of the way we communicate with prospects.
Yeah. I think I want to come back to that spacing element. I think you touched on something good there, Dave, is that's not something that we necessarily think on immediately in sales or sales development. The first one, attempts, like that definitely comes to mind. I've heard, that in sales training and from sales managers, and reiterated that to my teams in the past, just how many attempts it takes, especially to people who are new at sales. But I'm curious if you found a commonality looking at these different elements. Was it always that the believed number, what people thought they were doing, was better or higher depending on how it's measured? The actual was at the bottom and the optimal was somewhere in the middle. Did you kind of see that pattern play out across different elements?
So yes and no. In some cases, we found, in fact, in every case, people gave themselves the benefit of the doubt. People always assume they did better
Sure.
than in fact they did,
Right.
which shouldn't surprise any of us. But there were a few times where people believed the optimal. But what surprises me, there were more times than I would have expected where people actually, what they thought they should do was not aligned with what the optimal was. And so let me give 2 very specific examples. In the attempts, meaning how many attempts should we engage in before we give up on a new lead or a new prospect?
Right.
People believe they should have 15.1 attempts. And this is the reason it's a 0.1 is because we're averaging across lots of different questions. We call it
Sure.
15
Sure.
attempts. The optimal was 7. And so this is a scenario where people think that they should be doing actually a lot more work than they really should be doing. The irony is the actual was only 3.5. So in most cases, people are only doing, maybe half of what they should. Now, this was pretty controversial. So this infographic that you just referenced, we posted it on LinkedIn. We've had almost 250,000 views across a couple of different, LinkedIn shares, and it went viral, and we
Wow.
didn't anticipate it. And the reason it went viral is there was a lot of, frankly, debated and controversial points. One of them was this belief that most people think you should go, and this is in a B2B environment, you
Mhm.
should make 15 attempts, and this could be, a phone call, an email, a social media reach out, a voicemail, things like that. Most people believe they should go 15, and people were really shocked that the optimal was 7. And if you look at the infographic, and we'll make it available to all of your listeners, there's about a 70% drop in your contact rate after your 7th attempt, meaning your incremental effort after that 7th attempt is
Mhm.
pretty nominal. There's
Yep.
really not much value.
Yep. You hit that
Now,
point of diminishing return very quickly at number 7, as I saw in the
that's right.
infographic.
That's exactly. Now, there's another one. We talked about the spacing.
Mhm.
The most people think they should be doing 1.5 or 1.9 days spacing between each of those
Okay.
attempts. The optimal was 1 to 2 days. So like I think there was an alignment between what they think they should do and what the optimal is. Now, the actual in this case was similarly pretty poor. It was 10.4 days. So
Oh,
they were
wow.
500% worse than what we actually should do. So in every case, we always give ourselves benefit of the doubt, but there is a bit of a misalignment in terms of what people think they should actually be doing.
Yeah, with spacing, people were spot on, at least were for, what they thought they should be doing and what the data shows as optimal. Whereas, with attempts, they were overestimating, but then not following through. And if they had, even been doing 50% of what they believed to be optimal or believed to be what they were doing, they would have been right on point.
You got it. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Now, there were a few other surprises. And one thing I wanted to share with your listeners was there are a couple of very tactical things they can do that will make a dramatic effect, not just a subtle effect, but a very dramatic effect in the effectiveness of their prospecting. And these were kind of across all industries, all segments, all geographies. Now, in the survey and in the study data, there's a pretty good representation of Fortune, Fortune 500, all the way down to small startup companies. Now, what we found was there were definitely nuances that healthcare behaves a little differently than technology, and manufacturing behaves very differently than media. But generally speaking, the thing we found was you want to mix your media. You want at least 3 or more different media types when you're reaching out to people. And people averaged around 2, so we were not meeting the mustard. And the cliff between 2 and 3 was pretty dramatic. And so an example would be you'd want to call somebody, leave a voicemail, send an email, and then also do a LinkedIn Connect. Like something like that. That threshold, getting over 3, seemed to really be a tipping point when you're able to reach out to people. And our rationale, as we thought about the why behind this, and I'd be curious what you think, but we think it's because different profile of people, different type of people have a higher likelihood to responding to different media. And so if you just move through some of these, you're just going to find the one that this prospect or this customer is likely to respond to. But what have you seen?
Yeah, I think that is exactly where I was going to go, Dave. I heard my good friend Rex Biberston talking on this point. I think he was previously on your team there at InsideSales.com. So I think he took some good learnings from you guys. But he was talking about the fact that what you just touched on there is that you have different buyer personas. And even within those personas, you've got different individuals that prefer different forms of communication. And even within that, on the infographic, you guys talk about social as being one of those communication methods. Within that, you've got different social media platforms. I interview marketers who are one of my primary buyer personas on our podcast. And some of them default to saying, reach out to me on LinkedIn. Others say, I'm still very active on Twitter. Whereas some people say, I've left Twitter goodbye a long time ago. So I think there's a lot of nuance there into how people prefer to be communicated with that we have to take into effect. And so the more that you can spread out across those and pay attention to where you're getting responses, the better off you're going to be in the long run.
Look, I think that makes a ton of sense and is consistent with what we're seeing in the data. And one interesting thing is we also saw in the research that there's an average over 107 activities that a sales rep or an SDR rep is performing in a given day. And there's basically 8 different types of activities. And the obvious one, phone call, email, voicemail, social, like you just referenced, video, email, direct mail, text mail, chat, things like that. But it's kind of chaotic and non-structured in the way we're doing it. It's, sales reps are using intuition. And so these things that like you just referenced and building a systematic approach gives really dramatic uplift. Another one that we found, and this is one that we've known of for a while because this came out in a previous study, but response time. And I love this example. The average response time, if someone raises their hand, goes to your website, fills out a web form, engages with a chatbot, even places a call, an inbound call to you and leaves a voicemail. I'm not even going to ask because it's so bad. The average response time today is 38 hours.
Holy cow.
So imagine this. If you go into Nordstrom's today and say, hey, look, I'm interested in this pair of shoes, but I wear a 12 and a half. if they were to come back and say, hey, look, I'll get you something in 38 and a half hours, we would, it's crazy, right? It's kind of silly for me to even give that example. If I go to Baskin Robbins and say, look, I want some bubblegum ice cream, and say, hey, great, it's going to be almost 2 days before I can get back to you, like that buying impulse is gone. And so that is the current state. The optimal response time is 5 minutes, and 5 minutes is over 100 times more effective than just 30 minutes. That's how impactful it is. And so, interestingly, people still think 24 hours is an acceptable response time. We have 5 minutes, otherwise people are just going to move on. And it's no different than our personal lives and the business lives. So again, it's just, there's some real simple findings in the study that if you mix your media, you respond kind of, reasonably. In fact, my wife, we filed a patent around, building technology to automate the kind of an optimal response time. And my wife's like, wait. So Dave, you're telling me you patented calling people back? Like, that's you're geniuses. Like, but we're not doing it. Like, that's the problem, is we just we're overloaded with technology that we're just not doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the key takeaways for folks listening to this in sales, and especially in SDR roles or leading SDR teams, you mentioned one, Dave, mix your media, at least 3 or more different channels for communication, focus on that response time. Is there a third that you would add as a takeaway for listeners today before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, you want to go 7 attempts deep and then actually stop. Like, don't go to 15. Don't stop at 3. So it's 7 attempts deep, 3 to 4 plus media, and you have a 5-minute response window. And if take those 3 as takeaways. The only other thing I would tell you is, don't trust intuition. Don't trust what you think is right. Dig into the data. Intuition often fails us. I mean, it's failing in every industry. If you've watched the movie Moneyball, right? I mean, there's an old school way of doing it, and data is revolutionizing every industry, whether it's, sports, sales, marketing, retail, even our hobbies. Be very wary about trusting what you think or what survey results tell us. Actually look at your data, because even using the results from our infographic or they're general results. They're results from, across all industries. The best thing you can do is look at what your data is telling you and modify and adapt to the nuances of your sellers and adapt to the nuances of your buyers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime we can leverage data, especially as you mentioned, oftentimes, as you were talking about the history of AI, we need more data in order to make better decisions. But that's the encouraging thing at this point, whether you're a seller or in any industry, is that there is more readily available data that we can process these days. So let's lean into that. And I love the way that you broke down not only how you guys approached it, Dave, but some key takeaways for sales development professionals as well as sales development leaders. If anybody listening to this, Dave, would like to reach out to you or your team or get access to this report or the infographic, we can put some links in the show notes, but what would be the best way for folks to reach out or learn more?
Yeah, I think we'll put a link or two that allows you to download the infographic and the full study. And if you just go onto my LinkedIn profile and make a request, first, I'd love to connect with you, but we've actually printed full poster size versions of the infographic. And if you'd like that also, we'll send it to you for free. But so either go to the link in the podcast or connect with me via LinkedIn and just make a request or comment on the infographic post. Any of those 3 will work great.
I love it. I love that idea of the printed poster. That's a fantastic idea, Dave. Well, this has been phenomenal. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, Logan, really appreciate you having me on the show. And if ever we can help, let us know.
Digital marketing agencies have a tough job. You have to stay on top of the latest marketing strategies for your clients and your agency. What if there was a way you could address both at the same time? Imagine your agency putting out content with greater quality and quantity. Envision bringing your clients a turnkey solution for one of B2B marketing's fastest growing media strategies, podcasting. You know, all those clients asking for your help with their account-based marketing efforts? Picture being the first to bring them the idea of content-based networking. showing them the proven strategy for breaking into their most coveted accounts. Here's the concept. Sweetfish Media is looking to work with a limited number of innovative agencies interested in a new partnership model. We produce a podcast for your agency. You introduce the power of podcasting and Sweetfish services to your clients. Everybody wins. Learn more at sweetfishpartners.com.